Right, so we've had two of our questions so far. Jesus asks us, "Who do you say that I am?" He asks us, "Do you love me?" We've got a third question to think about. Now, it's in a Bible reading, and that's going to be read for us by Ishbel and by Jonathan. So if you want...
It's Mark 10, 46 to 52, and it's blind Bartimaeus receives his sight. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside, begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him."
So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road.
Okay, did you spot our third question? Spot it, yeah? What do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you? That's a question Jesus asks. And John Tallach is going to come up just now to help us think about that question.
What do you want me to do for you? First picture I get from this passage of Scripture is the division between the folks who are walking along the road out of Jericho and Bartimaeus by the roadside. He's been sidelined. You saw from the video the crowd, they had their agenda, they had places to go, they had people to see, and Bartimaeus is by the roadside, he's sidelined. Sometimes I think that folk can feel sidelined in relation to what the church does. The church has places to be, people to see, and they feel we're on the sidelines, there's nothing happening that has any impact on us. That's the way that Bartimaeus felt. Second thing I want you to think about on that passage is Jesus stopped and called Bartimaeus. Some in the crowd wanted to shut him up. He was an irrelevance. He was an intrusion. He meant nothing at all. But Jesus stopped and called him. And then Jesus says to him, "What do you want me to do?" I think that's astounding, do you not? This is Jesus who called the whole world out of nothing. This is Jesus who wrote the whole of history on a blank page. And Jesus says to this man, this beggar, this blind beggar, "What do you want me to do?" It's as if Jesus hands a blank page to him and says, "Write your own agenda. What do you want me to do for you?" How wonderful that Jesus would stop at the seat where you're sitting and he would say to you, "Here's a blank page." In fact, Dan's given you the blank page with a question. What do you want me to do for you? Louis Zamperini served with the United States Air Force in the Second World War. And he was shot down over the Pacific. He drifted for 40 days in a raft. He was then captured by the Japanese. He was tortured in a prisoner of war camp. He escaped. He got back to America. And after the war in 1949, Billy Graham did his first mass campaign in Los Angeles. And Louis Zamperini was prevailed on to go to hear the gospel preached. Do you know what happened when Louis Zamperini was in this atmosphere in which God was being worshipped as he is here today? And when the gospel was being preached as it is here today, what happened was all the prayers from the 40 days adrift on the Pacific, all the prayers from the cruelty of the prisoner of war camp crawled out of the woodwork, and they were there, right there in front of Zamperini. He remembered the prayers that he used to agonize over, crying to God for his help and his deliverance. That brought home to Zamperini that his prayers meant something. The prayers had a lasting significance. The prayers meant something to God in heaven. They were there in front of his eyes when he was hearing the gospel preached. I wonder if you take in how awesome this is, that your prayers are heard in heaven, that your prayers are meaningful to God, that Jesus stops by you and he says to you today, what do you want me to do for you? Third thing in this incident is Jesus touched Bartimaeus' eyes. His eyes were the problem. Lord, I want to see. Jesus touched his eyes, his blind eyes. Jesus goes to the source of the problem. Forgive me sharing this memory with you, but I think it's relevant. It's 50 years ago, this month, that Isabel and I were involved in a pretty horrendous car smash on the old road from Bewley to Inverness. So I was in Regmore for 3 months, and one man who came to visit me during these 3 months was Professor John Murray, whom you've probably never heard of, but he was a hero to us because we knew of him. He was a friend of my late father. And John Murray came all the way from Argyll. He was a professor teaching in Philadelphia, but he was at home at this time in Argyll with his folks. And he came all the way down from Argyll to visit little me in Regmore, Ward 14. Now, he didn't stay long, and before he prayed, he put out his hand and he took my hand in his hand. Nobody had ever done that before. And he was saying to me, I identify with where you're at. I feel for you. Your pain is my pain. Your trauma is my trauma. He took my hand in his hand. That's 50 years ago. It's just like yesterday. I can still hear him and the prayer that he offered when he lifted me up before God's throne of grace and committed me to his care. Now, Jesus comes where you are and he touches you, where the real problem is. He touches our sin. And as Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins, he takes your sin away. There is a miraculous change. There comes in forgiveness. Instead of trouble and trauma, there comes in peace. The touch of Jesus makes a difference. The last thing from this point, from this story, is everything changes after that. Bartimaeus gets up. He's no longer on the sidelines. He follows Jesus in the way. One or two of the other Gospels say that he was praising God. So, that's what happened 2,000 years ago. That transformation took place in the case of Bartimaeus. That transformation took place in the experience of Louis Zamperini in Los Angeles, 1949. And this is my prayer. You will know the touch of Jesus, his healing touch, and that you will know the change that ensues from his touch, so that today you can follow Jesus in the way and praising God.